Okay, so hey guys, and welcome back to another Axel 72 video, and in today's video I'm going to be giving my prediction for the Naoya Inoue versus Ramon Cardenas fight. And so if you are new around here and you haven't yet subscribed, please do so, like the video if you do indeed like the video, and let's get straight into this. So this is Naoya Inoue's return to America, the first time that he's fought here in 4 years. The way that it's been kind of made as this huge return is, a little bit surprising. Yes, 4 years is a long time, but it's the way that people have been acting about it is acting as though he's not fought in America in his whole career. He's had some very good, very big fights in America. He fought Maloney in America, and that was a great performance for himself. And he's had some good moments, but he's not really had a need to come to America because all realistically the big fights have been happening in Japan, and the way that he's been selling out in Japan, I think it was necessary for him to have the amount of time in which he's had out in Japan. I think the main reason in which now he's deciding to come back to America is because he's had that longer time to cement himself as a great name out in Japan, that now coming back to America, people who didn't know about him before when he was in America 4 years ago, now, know a bit more about him and are excited to watch him. And it will be interesting to see how well he sells out in America. I think it's going to be, like I say, it's interesting because it's not a massive fight, and realistically, it's not a fight in which people are too maybe fussed about, in the way of, not too many people will probably know Raymond Cardenas, and if you do, then maybe you'll be excited for this fight. But it's not exactly like an Akmadali fight or a Nakatani fight or a featherweight, world title fight. For in a way, it's not like a huge fight in which he's been linked with, but it is, like I say, a return to America. And like I say, it's on the amazing Cinco de Mayo weekend, and I've touched upon this in my previous predictions for Canelo versus Skull and Garcia versus Romero. This is, the Ring magazine, and well, I don't think they're involved in this event, but His Excellency for sure, because he is now working alongside Inoue, which is, something big to see. It's interesting to see that he's not really been wanting to put him on one of these big shows. I think he knows the star level of Inoue is big enough and should be, kept as main event status. But it seems like they have a bit of a plan for him, and like I say, it's just a maybe a flex to an extent, so that they can have the huge event out in New York on Friday night, and then have Skull versus Canelo with the great undercard Saturday night, and then have this on Sunday. It is, like I say, to an extent, just them showing off the fact that they can just feature some pound for pound great names throughout a whole weekend of just great Cinco de Mayo weekend boxing. And yes, they aren't all Mexican names, but it still is representing boxing when the eyes are going to be on it. And like I've also touched upon it in my other predictions, these fights as singular fights might not sell as well. If it was just Inoue versus Cardenas on a weekend in America, it probably would sell all right. But also the fact that they've got a world title on the undercard as well, and the fact that it's also a stacked weekend, in the way of boxing fans wanting to view on like the TV, they're gonna want to come and watch it, because there are, like I say, 3 big events to pick and choose from. They can choose whoever they want to watch, and I'm sure after watching 2 great nights of boxing the previous 2 nights, they're gonna want to tune into this one as a kind of final big hurrah of the weekend. So it's amazing to see, and like I say, it's really exciting, the state of boxing at the moment. It seems like most weekends at the moment we're seeing a big fight, or some big news happening, or something like that. We've just recently seen, of course, just last weekend, Chris Eubank Conor Ben, which was an amazingly entertaining fight with a great build up. And then now we've got these great fights on the weekend. We've just had Dubois versus Usyk, the rematch, announced. So it seems like boxing is in a better place than it has been throughout the past probably 10 years, to be completely honest, where we're just continuously seeing excellent fight after excellent fight, huge event after huge event. And now Inoue is seemingly wanting to get involved in that properly, and he probably does have to grow that American market that bit more to be able to be fully involved in it. And I feel like this is for sure an opportunity. It will be, like I say, interesting to see how well he sells. And he's up against Raymond Cardenas, of course, for the undisputed titles, being IBF, WBA, WBC, and WBO World Super Bantamweight titles. And Cardenas is a good opponent. He's an opponent in which definitely has his explosive level of power. I think he's known as Dynamita, or something like that, which is Mexican for dynamite. And he definitely has got some good highlight reel type of knockouts. Nothing crazy. He's not consistently knocking out high level opposition. He hasn't really fought a crazily high level of opposition. He's coming off a win against an undefeated, I believe, 20-0 guy, which was, a good win on Pro Box TV, a unanimous decision victory. And, like I say, he has had a few good stoppage victories in his time, a nice couple body shots. He goes to the body well, he switches it up to the head well. He does also step into his punches, similarly to that of an Inoue, maybe not as good as Inoue, but, like I say, he'll be coming forwards, he'll be applying pressure, he'll have his own level of power. When you look at previous opponents from Inoue, there's not too many huge power punches that you'll see. In recent times, Neri was probably one guy who was seen as a big puncher, and of course he was able to knock down Inoue, so possibly Cardenas could maybe rock him early on in the fight if Inoue's caught, lacking. But other than that, you look at a TJ Doheny, wasn't really the most powerful of punchers. Kim definitely wasn't the most powerful of punchers. Other than that, Donaire wasn't. He had decent level of power, I suppose, but nothing too crazy. Paul Butler wasn't really. Just to name a few opponents of his. Nobody realistically too crazy power wise. So, not to say that Cardenas is, but he's definitely gonna cause somewhat of a threat in that element, and so perhaps he could possibly, like I say, hurt Inoue early on in the fight, and we'll have to wait and see. Inoue, from what I've seen, especially in that last fight of his against Kim, he had the fight versus Neri, and perhaps he was overlooking Neri, and that's how he got caught early. But from the TJ Doheny fight and the Kim fight, he really showcased that he isn't overlooking any opponent, and he is more dialed in than ever. And he's not going to take any opponent lightly from now on and just think about other big matchups, because that almost cost him against Neri, and he can't be affording to do that. And even though there is a seemingly good plan there ready waiting for Inoue, he still of course has to be able to beat these lively, hungry, wanting success fighters who are wanting to change their career around. Of course, he's given these fighters opportunities. Somebody like a Cardenas, like I say, hasn't really been given that many opportunities in his career and hasn't fought that high level of opposition, but he is in the with an opportunity to become an undisputed world champion, which is a huge change in his career. It's not just winning one title; it's becoming undisputed against a pound for pound great, which of course it's something in which no fan should ever forget about. And I'm sure every fighter coming in to face Inoue is just thinking about that. And so, like I say, we probably will most likely see the best version of Cardenas, but is that enough to be able to beat somebody like Inoue? Who, like I say, again, in his last fight versus Kim, Kim was coming in on short notice, very short notice, but he put up a valiant effort. But Inoue really, realistically never left first gear, and he did something in which only some of the best fighters do. Canelo is known for doing this, and, some other fellow great fighters. Floyd Mayweather was able to do this as well. The fact that he could just turn the pace up whenever he wanted. And, a lot of fighters say, I can end the fight whenever they want and, stuff like that. But Inoue could actually do that versus Kim. And as soon as Kim was beckoning Inoue to come forwards, Inoue just stepped on, and within seconds he knocked him out. And it's just amazing to see. Like I say, only some of the greats can do that, where they can realistically change gear in front of your eyes and just up the tempo as soon as they want to, and just get you out of there just like that. And so, I do believe Inoue is going to be able to win this fight. I think he's going to be, of course, sharper, faster, have the higher IQ, be able to see the shots from Cardenas coming, might take the occasional shots, but I don't think the jab is anywhere near as good. I think, the body shots might have success, but I think Inoue's movement will be able to nullify that, and I think the power will be able to nullify that. I don't think Cardenas' defense is anything too impressive. And so, like I say, I think Inoue is going to be able to win, and I think he's going to be able to win via TKO in round 6. It seemingly is the case where he takes a couple rounds to just ease into it, and then he can go from there. And he's early on in the fight really methodically thinking and really figuring out his opponents each time. And so, yeah, it probably will take him a couple rounds, but inevitably, I think it will be a destructive performance for him to win via TKO in round 6. Then, who he can go on to fight next? Like I've mentioned, there is seemingly a bit of a plan there for Inoue, at least from what I've heard from what Bob Arum has been saying, and that is to perhaps get the Akhmadaliev fight next, the fight in which everybody's been wanting to see, and the fact that we haven't seen it yet is, a bit of a shame, but like I say, everybody's been wanting to see it. It's been warranted for Akhmadaliev. He's been working hard for it. He is the WBA interim champion, and also is in a good position with the IBF as well, I believe, and the IBF was trying to order it before. Of course, that didn't happen. He was meant to fight Goodman instead, and obviously that didn't end up happening. But I do believe it will probably be Akhmadaliev finally next. Like I say, it seems like they're wanting to make that fight for around September time, and then seemingly after that, if he gets through Akhmadaliev, then they're perhaps looking at a huge Japanese mega fight between Nakatani. Nakatani is facing Nishida for a unification belt for the IBF and WBC World Bantamweight titles. If Nakatani is able to win both of them belts, perhaps he can go on and have another fight, maybe defending both of them belts, maybe going for another one of the titles in the bantamweight division. If he's able to win that, he's a megastar at that point as well in Japan. Then he might want to go up to fight at super bantamweight. We'll have to wait and see. Inoue, seemingly was wanting to progress to featherweight perhaps quicker than what he has. So, this plan in which I'm talking about might not actually happen because, there was a plan for Inoue to fight, I believe it was Tapales and Neri and then maybe Casemiro and then to move up into the featherweight division. Instead, he's fought Tapales, Neri, Doheny, and as well as Kim, and now he's fighting Cardenas. So it's definitely not the route that he's wanted to, or planned originally to go down when he moved up into the super bantamweight division. But if he fights again at Akhmadaliev, it's another fight in the division. If he waits for Nakatani, it's another fight in the super bantamweight division. So I still believe it will be a while before we see him in the featherweight division. So for any of them big fights there, realistically, I feel like we will still be waiting a bit of time. It's just depending on if Inoue can keep making the super bantamweight limit without any problems, which for the moment it seems like he isn't really having too many issues with, but we will of course have to wait and see. And then the other big major world title fight, which is on this card, is of course the WBO World Featherweight World Title being fought by Rafael Espinoza versus Edward Vazquez. Of course, Espinoza yet again defending his belt. He's gone down a bit of a route that I think does make sense. Espinoza, as obviously he got the dramatic shock victory, which was an amazing fight, and he did so well to survive the huge knockdown, and a couple other times in which he was seemingly rocked to then be able to have finish great in the first fight versus Ramirez, and then he went on to fight Chirino, which was a bit of a just a good voluntary defense in which didn't really do too much for his career, but it was still a good win for him and a stoppage victory as well. And perhaps maybe it did do something good for his career. But I think it definitely gave him confidence to believe that he deservedly is a world champion. And then we waited out for the rematch with Ramirez. And then, Ramirez quit that fight. There was the talks of him getting caught with an elbow in the round before and his eye being swollen. And then, he got caught with a nice shot by Espinoza in the round after, and then he quit. So that seemingly is the end of that kind of rivalry there. Now Espinoza has to move on with his career and find his route as a world champion. Is he good enough to go on to unify? He probably needs a couple of fights before he does that. Something like an Edward Vazquez, I believe, is a great test for him. Vazquez is coming down from the from the super featherweight division into the featherweight division. Vazquez is typically smaller for most guys in the super featherweight division, so you'd think if he's moving down, he perhaps might be in against people more his own size. It's the opposite. He's now facing a guy who's, I believe, 6'1" in Espinoza, where Vazquez is 5'7", so there is a huge kind of size difference between the two of them. But Vazquez has always caused a lot of problems for great world champions in which he's fought. He fought Raymond Ford and Cordina. Yes, neither of them are world champions currently, but they were both very good fighters, and I don't believe Ford was a world champion actually at the time that he fought him, but still, he was at one point, and he gave Ford a very close, tough test. He gave Cordina a very close, tough test. Two fights in which definitely could have gone into Vazquez's favour on the scorecards if he was maybe just that bit more fortunate. He was unlucky to not get the fights go his way, but it really shows that if you are in close fights against top guys, that you're going to get given more opportunities, and that's what he has been given here against Espinoza. Yes, again, like I say, another good opportunity in a fight in which I do believe is necessary, like I say, for Espinoza's career to showcase that he can beat one of the top contenders in the division, and again, give him more confidence, and like I say, move away from the rivalry in which he had with Ramirez. And Espinoza has a lot of pressure on him, being a Mexican on this card, alongside Cardenas, being a Mexican on this card, fighting on Cinco de Mayo weekend. It is going to come with a lot of pressure, and Vazquez isn't going to have that pressure. Vazquez is just going to be coming in, for another chance for a world title. He's coming off a couple wins since his loss versus Cordina, and he's going to, try and upset the apple cart again. I feel like this has the makings to be an excellent fight. Vazquez is going to bring the pressure, but Espinoza is also going to be willingly there to throw and let his hands go as well. I believe that Espinoza is going to be able to win via unanimous decision. I think that Espinoza is, like I say, that bigger character. I think he is going to be perhaps a little bit harder of a puncher. I don't think he's going to be able to knock out Vazquez, but I think he's going to be able to match the tempo. Vazquez, I don't think his power coming down into the featherweight division is really gonna change too much, and I think he's just going to keep pit-pattering his shots, but like I say, bring the pressure and make it into a firefight into the later rounds where they're both throwing and probably both landing. It's going to be interesting to see how Vazquez deals with the height difference, but I do think inevitably, the will and the combinations in which Espinoza throws. Espinoza fights at a high tempo and will willingly let his hands go, but a lot of the time the combinations still look quite controlled, which was something in which I was impressed with. He very easily could have got into a bit of a war of a fight with Ramirez in their first fight, but he didn't really do that. He still, like I say, kept his shape and kept good with his combinations, and I think if he does that again, instead of just standing straight, square up in front of Vazquez like Cordina did, then I think Espinoza is going to be able to win via unanimous decision. Then who he goes on to fight next, perhaps he might need one more defense before he goes on to for a unification fight. I think the best kind of unification route in which you'll possibly go down would be to fight the winner of Leao versus Kameda. Of course, Leao beat Lopez. Leao is now going to Japan to fight and defend his belt against Kameda, which, full credit going over to Japan and defending his belt. But I just don't necessarily know if I see that happening next. So possibly something like a Neri. I think that could be a great test, and again something different. That bit more of an aggressive, more physical, perhaps power puncher in Neri, or who looked good moving it up into the featherweight division in his last contest. Who also, is very fiery, of course, like we saw in his, I think it was weigh-in before that fight. Or Carrington. Carrington, of course, with top rank as well. They might be finally wanting to give him the opportunity. He's ranked number 1 and he's wanting a world title, so that might happen next. But yeah, that is it for today's video. Hope you did enjoy. Like the video if you did need a like video, subscribe if you're new, and thanks for watching.